Hello everybody, this is Yasmin from Yarkspiri fantasyart.com. Today I'm going to be working on a character that's very similar to a superhero. I chose this character design for this week for a very specific reason, because next week I actually plan to show you guys a muscle anatomy study. It's good practice to study anatomy. I have several reference books that I use whenever I have any issues with trying to figure out how the muscles would move or which muscles I would see in certain shadows. So I do have several references that I use for that, and I'm going to show you hopefully next week what you can do with those references and what can actually help you out when you're trying to understand the human anatomy as well. So that's why this character is more of a superhero-like character. You see a lot more muscle definition even with his costume on. He has very tight-fitting clothes. It's so that I can actually go through with you guys on how to do proper muscle anatomy studies. Now, as always, I do start in grayscale because this is going to be a full illustration, very similar to last week's video. Now, I do generally start off with the torso, mainly because a lot of the proportions, the body movement is determined by how the torso itself is moving. So I find that if I don't fully flesh out, or at least get a very good grasp of the torso, the rest of the drawing doesn't read very well. It also helps me solidify proportions overall for the character, which is why I do spend quite a bit of time on making sure that the torso is balanced with the rest of the character, otherwise the character will appear off balance. The original mask design that I had for this character actually had him smiling this mischievous smile. The character was a different style character than I was used to working with, but when I actually started drawing it out and trying to flesh out some of the detail, I didn't like the way the design was going. It didn't read that it was a mask, so I did want to reinforce that it was a mask that he was wearing and it wasn't his face that he was actually smiling. He kind of looks like a mad scientist like this, but I wanted to have it more of a steampunk look to it. So for that reason, later on you'll see me change the mask design quite significantly compared to what it was originally. I do keep the goggles in there because that's more of a steampunk theme, but I do end up removing quite a bit of the smile so that he's more sad looking actually. But it fits the character, so that's why I changed the mask design. Now, I am working on a couple of different layers for the body, which is why you see me working on one body part at a time. There's pros and cons to this. One of the major cons, you actually see it, you'll see some of it, is that when if I do use a color burn or another effect on top of these layers, depending on how these layers are actually layered on top of each other, they can actually be affected. So it is something you have to watch out. Normally what I'll do is I will flatten out the character if I see it's an issue. But if I do require the flexibility of having those layers, I do have the option of creating a new layer where it's just a mask selection. So it's just filled in with black, but it's also turned off so I can't see it. I do that so that it doesn't actually affect the overall piece, like color-wise. However, it still allows me editing options later on. It's just a quick trick that I learned a while back, but it really does help when you need that flexibility for editing. Now I did just cut ahead there. The reason why I did that is because I did do quite a few changes, but I couldn't fit everything even after I sped it up within this video. So to keep it within the 15-minute time limit, I did cut out a portion of it. It was the same techniques I was using throughout the piece though, so it's the reason why I cut it out. Now, because he has a sword in each hand, they're relatively in the same perspective. It was an option for me to copy and paste it into the other hand, which is a lot of time. Why draw the same thing twice? I haven't added the shadows specifically for each sword, so I did have that option, and I knew it wouldn't affect, or I didn't have to make too many changes to the overall cast shadows. Once again, I did cut forward just because I did try a couple of different background ideas. I wasn't satisfied with any of them. And once again, because I do have restrictions on the file size and the length of time on these videos, I just cut ahead of it just to show you, so I could show you the end result. Now, compared to most of the other illustrations you've seen me do, this one actually took quite a bit longer than the other ones did. Most of the other ones were about 4 or 5 hours on average, but this one actually took me about 7 hours to do. It was because it was much more heavy on the perspective, so I do spend more time on that to make sure it's correct. The pose was also a lot more difficult for me to figure out because I wasn't happy with it, so I just restarted several times. So that took up a lot more time than I had originally anticipated. Now, compared to the rest of the character had enough highlights, but the boots didn't, so I just went in on a separate layer and I added some additional highlights in certain areas. This was just so that the whole character read as a single piece rather than a separate piece. Now, because the background was not showing up the right color, all I did was add a basic color overlay on the entire background behind the pillars. That helped me get the same color values that fit the background. All I did there was add some additional colors so that the character and the background worked together, because the colors that were in the character were completely different from the background colors, and that's something that you try to avoid, because otherwise it doesn't look like the character belongs in that background. So that was something that I did change. So if you like this video, please feel free to subscribe to my channel. Also, don't forget to visit the main site, which is www.minral.com. There's a lot of illustrations there that I haven't featured on my YouTube videos, and quite a few that you will see there in the future that won't be on my YouTube videos as well. I plan to do some more studies to show you, so you won't be seeing the full illustrations that I normally work on during my free time. So please check out those two places, and I hope to see you next week. Take care.